Whether you're for him or against him, pretty much everybody in America has a very strong opinion about Donald Trump. But what really drives a mogul turned candidate? Here to discuss is Javier Amador, visiting professor of psychology at the State University of New York and a former director of Columbia University's Department of Psychiatry, Diagnosis and Evaluation Research Center. It means he's just a very smart man. And Alan Dershowitz, the author of Electile Dysfunction, a guide for unaroused voters. A very smart man and very clever with book titles as well. So thank you both, gentlemen, for coming in. Dr. Amador, I know obviously you're not Donald Trump's psychologist, but
I wouldn't be here if I was. I couldn't talk about him.
You've seen a lot of him on the campaign trail over the past year or so. Can you offer your assessment? What are you observing? What are we observing as you?
Well, first and foremost, because a lot of people say, how can you diagnose someone? I'm not here to diagnose them, but I can diagnose signs and symptoms and difficulties.
Just
and
it's
standard, it's standard practice in forensic psychology. You don't always meet the person. What do I see? I see what a lot of people see, the narcissism. If you look at the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, I mean, this is someone who has an exaggerated sense of his importance. Of course, he is a very important person right now as a nominee, but also has a very thin skin. This is somebody who if you insult him, it enrages him. If you even say anything that is remotely possibly interpreted as an insult, he will interpret it as an insult. But the other thing that we're not talking about, I'm not hearing people talk about, is that Donald Trump appears to me psychologically to be somebody very, very afraid.
You say there is anger, beneath the anger is fear?
Always, almost always, beneath the kind of, really it's rage that he expresses at his rallies, in the debates, in the interviews. I've been watching him for more than a year and watching interviews and extemporaneous speeches he's giving, not teleprompter speeches, as we all know. And he's got a lot of anger, and that anger really is based in fear. And we know what he's afraid of. We know the walls that he's trying to build.
What's he, what fear of?
Well, he has many conspiracies that he's worried about. He's worried, I mean, I made a list, it's so long I won't read the whole thing. Of course, that the election is going to be rigged, which is just entirely based in, to coin Secretary Clinton's phrase, Donald's reality and Mr. Trump's reality. There's no evidence of that whatsoever, and I'm not going to be the person who's going to litigate that. He's afraid of immigrants, both documented, for example, the Syrian immigrants, and undocumented immigrants, Muslims, Mexicans. The judge in the case against Trump University, because he's of Mexican heritage. He's afraid of the DNC. He's afraid of the GOP. He believes there's conspiracies in all of these areas. Secretary Clinton, look at all the things. He's certain that Secretary Clinton and the so-called Clinton cartel are doing to him. Everything from sending people to create violence in his rallies to, we were talking in the green room beforehand, Alan, and you reminded me of one other thing that he's accusing her of, and I'm forgetting what it is, but there's such a long list of conspiracies, including global warming, made up by the Chinese, the media, of course. I mean, let's not leave you guys out. On and on and on. And I have to end with, Tom Cruise's father conspired to assassinate President
Ted Cruz.
Ted Cruz. Did I say Tom Cruise?
Sorry
about that. Not Tom
Ted
Cruise.
Cruz. Yeah.
Ted Cruz.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to make light of any of this. I really don't. And I'm sorry for the slip. But I mean, think about that.
Yeah. So who is in? As you're nodding your head as he is speaking here. Are you nodding in agreement, or?
Well, I'm a little skeptical of trying to diagnose candidates.
Exactly.
Generally. One point I do disagree with Dr. Amador. I think if he were his psychologist, he would be here today, because Donald Trump would want him to be here and say he is the healthiest person ever to run for president. There's never been a more mentally stable person in the world. I mean, he is so full of himself that he would even probably want his psychologist to testify, as he had his doctor foolishly, on the basis of almost no investigation, come up with that medical report that he was the greatest person in the world. But I want to analyze him rationally as a political candidate. I think what may appear to be mental illness or whatever has a real rationale. I think what he's doing is he's speaking to two audiences with two voices. He knows how to speak to his base. He knows how to speak to the people out there who want to be riled up. And at the same time, he then can speak the next day and say, I didn't really mean to say that. I didn't mean that I want you to go out with pitchforks the day after the election and have a revolution. I really meant to say I'm just going to do what Al Gore did. So he has this capacity, and it's a brilliant capacity, to actually speak to two different audiences with two different voices, and that can be dangerous. And look, he's accused Hillary Clinton of doing the same thing. He said at the Al Smith dinner that she has one public persona and one private persona. Was he projecting what he himself does? He's very hard to figure out, but I think we have to take him at face value.
Well, you said mental illness. I don't know about that.
I wasn't saying
I would
mental
say,
illness.
huh? No, he said
But
that.
just you're analyzing.
I just
it.
think that
Right.
from maybe it's a personality trait that there's narcissism there, and then, but I've often heard from different psychologists or psychiatrists that that's not necessarily a bad thing to be narcissistic. Or
It can be a good thing
Yeah.
if you've got good impulse control,
Yeah.
which he's clearly demonstrated he doesn't. I mean, if you look at the reports from his inner circle, from his running mate, his spokespeople, he's going to accept the results of the election and then he contradicts them. His impulse control with the Twitter wars is
That's
clearly
the most
very
interesting
poor.
thing to me, is that someone who is running as leader of the free world can tweet about a journalist or about someone who's inconsequential, because you would never get a Mitt Romney or a Barack Obama
Right.
or a Ronald Reagan, and there wasn't Twitter back then, but even thinking about what, he's tweeted about me. Why does he care about what I think?
Well, he has no sense of priorities. Anything that comes into his head, he must respond to immediately. And that's why he was so good in the first third of all three debates.
Yeah.
And then Hillary Clinton managed to press some buttons, and then the other Donald Trump comes out.
Yeah.
And we don't know who the real Donald Trump is, and we're electing both of them. So you have to like both sides and both voices to cast the vote for him.
Our conversation continues on the other side of the break. We'll be right back. And we're back. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton traded barbs last night at the Al Smith dinner, but what went on behind the scenes may really surprise you. Back with me now, Dr. Javier Amador and Alan Dershowitz, and we're continuing our conversation about, what drives Donald Trump to do some outlandish things sometimes, and you believe
That he has a long standing of not just normal paranoia. Look, sometimes we should be paranoid and we should be afraid. But this is somebody with a long standing of what we would refer to in psychology as pathological paranoia, meaning it's in the spectrum of mental disorder potentially, or maybe, actually.
not
and what
just
do I
a
mean?
personality trait.
No, yeah, exactly. And this is not just about the election. And earlier Alan said that it was Hillary Clinton in part, pushing his buttons. But remember, he's espoused conspiracy theories going all the way back to the television, the Academy of Television Arts and the Emmy Awards, that they were rigged against him personally. This is a personality trait, and traits can become pathology. Yes.
Well, we have to be very careful.
Yeah.
We've had two experiences in my lifetime with people who were thought to be mentally ill. One of them was Barry Goldwater, and when he ran in 1964, over 1,000 psychiatrists in an article in Fact magazine diagnosed him as mentally ill, and it now turns out that he was a perfectly normal, reasonable guy. Today he'd be in the center of the Republican Party. But then we had a Secretary of State named James Forrestal, who was actually in charge of our Cold War with the Soviet Union. And he was a raving paranoid, ultimately jumped out of the 15th floor of his hospital, killed himself, fearing that Russian planes were coming. Imagine having a Secretary of Defense who was a paranoid. So we have to understand that the concept of mental illness is a serious one. We shouldn't use it politically just against people whose policies we don't like. And it's very important to give the benefit of the doubt to the candidate that what they're doing is calculated and rational without trying to diagnose them or attribute character traits to them. There may be character traits, but I think when we vote, when we consider a candidate, we have to consider them on the merits of their views, not the underlying psychology behind it.
Yeah. Let's talk about Cardinal Dolan last night. Let's talk about the Al Smith dinner, because Cardinal Dolan was sitting right in the middle between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and he shared this interesting moment. Listen.
And after the little prayer, Mr. Trump turned to Secretary Clinton and said, "You know, you are one tough and talented woman." And he said, "This has been a good experience in this whole campaign, as tough as it's been." And she said to him, "And Donald, whatever happens, we need to work together afterwards."
So I mean, it was pretty tense last night. So what does that say? Does it say that this is a show? What we hear? So again, who is the real?
Oh, Cardinal
what's
Dolan
real?
is a great guy, and he always tries to look at the most positive part of everybody. He's also a reconciler. Also, when you have the two candidates and you have the great Cardinal Dolan, between them, they're going to put the best possible light on this.
And the cameras.
And although we don't know if the cameras were on, whether this was confidential, it certainly wasn't a confessional, because the Cardinal wouldn't be telling us what went on in confessional. But he is a guy who brings out the best in people.
Yeah. So what does this say about the difference between what we hear in public and what actually happens in private?
Well, look, everybody has a public side and a private side. That's not news, and that's not something that should surprise anybody. You know, getting back to what are we voting for when we vote for an elected official? Yes, their views, but also their actions, their behaviors, and we look at what they do over time, hopefully, when we make an educated decision. So I'm not arguing one way or the other about whether or not Donald Trump has mental illness, and I want to be very clear about that. What I am saying, however, though, is that a lot of people in the media and a lot of experts and pundits are scratching their heads and saying, why is he doing this? And there is a psychological perspective. The reason he may be doing this, and it certainly appears that way to this psychologist, is that he does have a problem with narcissistic personality issues.
But I can give you personal...
I want to get to Hillary Clinton's
impulse.
Yeah, no,
personality
see, I know Hillary Clinton, and she is exactly the same in private as she is in public. There is no difference between the Hillary Clinton I know from Martha's Vineyard and from other places and the Hillary Clinton I see on the stage. I've also met Donald Trump. When I've met Donald Trump, he's perfectly rational, a perfect gentleman.
He's not the same person
I
you
was
see up on the stage.
shocked when I saw him on the stage. They are completely different people. Hillary Clinton, you get the same person, whatever.
Do you agree with that? Because I'm not. People say it's hard to connect. That she's calculating and that she's not warm. And when you meet her, I have to say, when you meet Donald Trump in person, he's not the same as when he's up on the stage. When I interviewed him and then I see him on the stage, I said, "Who is that person?"
But I don't see any difference.
But then when you meet Hillary Clinton as well, she's very warm in person, but not necessarily that warm when you see her on television. I have to be honest. What is that, Doctor?
Well, one-on-one is very different than when you're in front of a crowd of 5,000 people and the cameras are on you. And that's really what I meant about there's a private side and then there's a public side. I mean, we're sitting here right now in front of cameras, and this isn't the same person exactly. I'm the same person in terms of my ideas, in terms of my beliefs and integrity that I am in my living room. But I don't talk like this in my living room, not exactly like this. So what are we seeing? I mean, what we're seeing is somebody who is reacting. He's not just promulgating views that he has. He's very reactive to what others say about him, to what others believe about him, are published about things that are published about him.
But we talked about Donald Trump, you said someone who has a very high opinion of themselves. Anybody who runs for president, don't you think they would have a high opinion?
You better have high self-esteem.
What does that say about her personality? What have you noticed about her?
Well, I'll speak to that in a minute if you like, but let me just say this. When someone says, I'm the only one who can fix the problem, that's at a different level of having a high opinion. That's beyond self-esteem. That's grandiosity. Whatever, I think in anybody's book. Look, Hillary Clinton is a highly, what Donald Trump said about her, according to Cardinal Dolan, makes a lot of sense. That's certainly my view of her. It's my view of Donald Trump generally as well. Highly competent individuals, highly successful individuals, articulate individuals. But we certainly don't see the kind of behaviors in Secretary Clinton's past that we see with Donald Trump, the kind of language that was recorded in 2005 about women, that is well, I'll just say that.
But he's a populist candidate, and populist candidates have a rational basis for making the kinds of appeals he makes. So I want to take Donald Trump at face value without in any way analyzing him psychologically, and I say he has a rational basis for speaking to the two audiences with two voices. In the end, it didn't serve him well in the general election. It served him very well in securing his base during the
You can have a rational basis and it could still come from a paranoid pathological place.
I have to go. Fascinating conversation, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We'll be right back.